Automatic CSS is hands down the most powerful and customizable utility framework for WordPress page builders. But we have taken things to the next level with Automatic CSS 2.0. So I want to jump into the dashboard, show you some of the changes that we've made, also talk about some of the new features that come along with version 2.0. So the first thing you're going to notice when you upgrade is that the entire dashboard has been redesigned. And we didn't just focus on making this prettier or more elegant. We focused on user experience. Particularly, we wanted to save a lot more space and we wanted to limit the amount of scrolling up and down that you had to do when using the dashboard. If you remember in the older versions of Automatic CSS, there was a lot of scrolling. Every input row had its own description to go along with the name. And so one thing that we've done to save space is we've taken anything that required a description or an explanation, and we've put those into tooltips, which allows us to really minimize the height of these input rows. We also took some of the rows that were duplicated. For example, when you have text size, a min and a max, those used to have their own individual rows. The min would be a row, the max would be a row. We've now combined those inputs into a single row. We've taken away lots of the extra padding that was involved in the old design. And then another thing that we've done is introduced accordions. So when you are editing your primary color, for example, when you come to the colors palette, you used to see all the main colors, primary, and then all of the shades would be listed below. They would all have their own explanations. It was a lot of wasted space. In this new version in 2.0, everything is hidden in accordions so that when you want to edit your primary color, you can do that without touching your shades. But the minute you want to edit your shades, you can simply open the panel, edit your shades, and then if you want to move to the next set of shades for your secondary color, for example, it will close the primary shades accordion while you're working in secondary. And so I can see almost all of my colors here without scrolling. It's just very, very minimal scrolling. Another thing is when you do need to scroll on a longer page, the sidebar, the navigation, the save changes button, these are all sticky, so they don't leave your view. It used to be on the old design, you would scroll way down on a page to deal with some settings, and you would either have to scroll then all the way to the bottom to click the save button at the bottom, or you would have to scroll back up to click the save button that was up in the sidebar that you could no longer see. And none of that is the case anymore. It doesn't matter where you are in any single panel, you can always access the save changes button. You can always access the navigation. These are major, major UX improvements. I also want you to notice while we're here on the color screen that you can now edit the saturation value for any color, or any shade, I should say. Every color and any shade. This was never the case before. You could only customize the lightness value. Now, as you know, shades are primarily driven by the lightness value. That was the most important value to be able to customize. But if you really want to dial in, some designers do tweak the saturation values of their shades, and if you couldn't do that in ACSS, you couldn't truly match the colors from a design. But now you can edit those saturation values. You can edit them to 2 decimal places, in fact. So very, very granular control. I also want you to notice that when I do make a change to a default value, I now get a little indicator on my input row. So this is a very beneficial feature for quickly seeing which settings you've changed and which ones are still set to their default. So we can see here that 70 is obviously our default. This one has been changed to 69.9. Therefore, it gets a change indicator. I now have a better reset button as well. I can reset that value back to its default. The indicator goes away. All of this stuff is designed to improve the user experience. Another thing that we'll take a look at is, let's go into some of the features. And some of these features are in the dashboard. Some of them are inside of the builder itself. So we're going to talk about left and right section padding. Before, with section padding, it was always constant. You would set it to a variable, for example, like var space im. now you can actually set a custom min and max value for your left and right section padding. And this is very, very important. So I'm going to go ahead and open a new page, and I'm going to show you exactly how this works. So I'm going to edit the home page here. I am in Bricks 1.5 beta, and I want you to see when we have, let's go to the front end here. I'm going to go into mobile mode, and you can see that is the amount of spacing that I currently have by default on my website. Now, that's kind of a laptop or a wide tablet kind of view, and there are a lot of people who want more padding on laptops and tablets, whereas on the desktop, you don't even see any padding. The padding really only matters on smaller devices. So when you get down, you may want a lot more padding on a laptop-sized device. Well, in Automatic CSS previous versions, this was more difficult to do. Now it's very simple. I can take this max value for my side padding, and I can bring it up to 50 or 60 pixels. Let's go ahead and set it at 60. Now remember, all of these are, we use pixels in the dashboard for reference, but on the back end, everything is converted to rims. So pixels are never used anywhere in the actual framework, in the actual output of the CSS, but they are used for reference. But they will be converted into relative units, which is perfect for accessibility purposes. Okay, so now that I have set that to 60 pixels, I'm going to go ahead and refresh, and now you see that my side padding has a much bigger gap. I can set that to 120 pixels if I want. Now keep in mind that this is automatically responsive, so it's always going to go back down to my min value, which I could set even lower if I wanted to. So I'll set that one at 16. So now we'll refresh here. You can see I have a much bigger side gap on this laptop or tablet sized device. But watch what happens as I continue to get to a smaller screen. That responsive padding goes all the way down to 16 pixels or 1.6 rem on this particular website. So on laptops, this is what I have. And down on actual mobile devices, I'm back to normal side padding. The ability to set that and make it responsive like that is astronomically valuable, right? You would have to set this manually at every breakpoint if you weren't using Automatic CSS, or you would have to generate your own clamp functions, which then means you have to generate your own fallbacks for browsers that don't support clamp. Automatic CSS does all of this for you out of the box. Stuff that really, it doesn't even seem like it would be that big of a hassle until you actually try to do it. And then you realize, oh wow, this is a really big hassle. I don't want to have to deal with this. I'm glad that Automatic CSS does this kind of stuff for me. Okay, the next thing that we're going to look at is text and heading line height. So if we hop over to typography here, you're now going to see a new line heights dashboard. We can set our line heights on our body text, and we can set a line height for every single heading level that is available to you. This was never possible before in Automatic CSS. You would have to rely on either Oxygen or whatever builder you were using to set the line heights of your headings and text. You can now set these directly through Automatic CSS. Another thing I want to take a look at here is your global button styling. So if we head over to buttons and links, you're going to see a lot more options for global button styling now. One big one that was heavily requested is the ability to set a custom button text size. The old Automatic CSS would default to the M text size for buttons, which is good for the vast majority of websites. But if it is the case that you need to customize that button text, we wanted to make that available to you. So you can now simply toggle the custom button text size on, and then you can set a custom button text size. Let's go ahead and try this out in the builder. So I'm going to delete this heading right here. We will delete, and then I am going to add a button. I'm going to add a button class. So we'll click on the button. We're going to add button primary. That's going to create my button. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now we're going to change this to 24 pixels. Now, remember, this would apply to all buttons. So it doesn't matter if I'm using a primary, a secondary, an accent button, an outline button. It's always going to, let's refresh there, show me that default text size. All right. So now if I come in and I want to make that button text size really small instead, We can do that. I will refresh, and now I have small button text size. Another thing that we added is the ability to control font weight. If you want all of your buttons to be a stronger font weight, very easy to do from the dashboard. You now have bold buttons. Button line height is set at 1 by default, but you do have control over this now. You can change the letter spacing. We can do like a 0.25 em. And now all of my buttons across the website will have letter spacing. And that's obviously looks terrible. Let's go ahead and do 0.025 em and see how that looks. All right, so you can control letter spacing. Remember, that is across all buttons and button variations. I can choose to capitalize or uppercase or lowercase my buttons. We'll go ahead and refresh on the front end, and we now see that I have uppercase buttons. I can now have a button width, a minimum button width. This isn't a fixed button width, it's a minimum button width. And what this is really good for is if you have buttons where your text is like just, high, something like that. If you didn't have a default minimum width, like I'll put that at 0, you would end up with very small buttons, which don't really look that great throughout a website, right? And so you now have the ability to say, well, I want my buttons to be at least 200 pixels wide. And now, even if you have very small text, you still have something that appears to be a working button, all right? It's not just a text with maybe a background and some padding. All right, the next thing that we have is the ability to control that button padding across the Y and X axis. So if I want larger buttons, so I can do 1.5 em on our Y, and I can do 2.5 em on our X. We'll save changes there. Now I should basically have a fatter button, and I do. Now the padding wasn't enough to change the effective width because it's very small text, but if I did something like get a free inspection, notice that it still retains that left and right padding, but it was allowed to get bigger as the text got bigger. So that, again, that minimum width is not constraining it to a specific width. It's just saying that has to be the minimum. And now I have a normal looking button. All right, the next thing is I can change my border radius. This was always a possibility, but we've just changed the default now. It used to default to a variable, and now it defaults to 0. You can put var radius em in there if you want to. You can put 1 em in there if you want to. Really, whatever value you want to be able to put in there, you can put in there, and instantly all of your buttons will conform to that value. Another thing that we've added is a default link color. So you no longer have to set a link color in Oxygen or Bricks. It is going to inherit this default link color by default. So anytime you drop a link into a page, we'll drop some text. I don't want to drop rich text, though. I just want to drop some normal text, basic text. Okay, and it's down here, but that's okay. So I convert this to a link, and it's automatically my website's primary color. I did not set this in the builder, and if, in fact, you did set this previously in Oxygen, you're going to want to clear that out. It is now controlled with Automatic.css. All right, the next thing we're going to take a look at is marker color. This is a feature inside of the builder itself. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to delete this, and I am going to add a rich text element. And we are going to open this up, and I am going to add a list. So we'll say list item, and then I will make this an unordered list, another list item, and a third list item, and that should be enough. This bullet right here is called a marker, and it's really helpful if you can change the marker color of a list. I can make the text base color, for example, and you probably can't see the change on there. Let me maybe do it a secondary so you guys can see better. So I'll do text secondary, which is going to change. Well, that's hard to see too because it's like a dark purpley color. But it did change that color, and it changed the color of the bullet, right, of the marker. But what if I want to control the marker color separately from the text color? That requires, in any builder, custom CSS. You have to write custom CSS to be able to achieve that. But in Automatic CSS, you simply use a new marker class. And I can say, I want that marker to be my website's primary color. So marker primary, and you can see that we now have that marker color changing to the primary, even though our text is still the secondary color. So that is a new feature in Automatic CSS. We can also change focus color on the fly. So let me go ahead and delete this right here. We are going to add our button back. And I'm going to do this in 2 separate sections. We're going to have this be button primary. Perfect. And I want to show you a couple really cool things about this. I'm going to go ahead and quickly duplicate that section. Instead of button primary here, well, we can actually leave it on button primary. It doesn't matter all that much. I need to make sure that these are actual button URLs so that we can focus on them on the front end. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save. Now, you probably already know that Automatic CSS applies default keyboard focus styling. You actually have control over the outline offset. You have control over the color of the focus at the global level. But now in ACSS 2.0, you also have the ability to change focus styles on any section or element. So check this out. Sometimes what would be the case is we would have a background that is the same color, primary, as our focus color. And if I take this button, that's why I knew I wanted to change that button color. So let's do a button white. So I have a white button there, right? Now we're going to look at this on the front end. We'll refresh the builder real quick so our buttons look like they do on the front end. Okay, there we go. So now when I do my keyboard navigation and I'm checking my focus color, I can see the focus ring on this button. But when I get down here, I cannot see the focus ring because it's the exact same color as this primary background. So what I need is the ability to, on the fly, without writing any CSS or special rules or anything like that, just say, hey, anything that's focusable in this section should have a different color. Let's say have black as our focus color. So I'm just going to grab the entire container for that section, and I'm going to say focus black. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now we're going to go to the front end, and we're going to check this out. I now have a black focus ring, and that would be on any element in that section that gets focus. A button, a link, doesn't really matter. Now, you also have the ability to do that at the element level. So I put that on the container. I could also click the button itself and say focus black, and it would only make the focus color black on that individual element. So you see it still works, right? But if we had another focusable element in there, so I can add another button as an example, and then we'll use some owl spacing to quickly space those apart. All right, and then I'm going to make this say button black. And remember, this button right here, I have not told it to change its focus style. And let's make sure it actually has a link so it's focusable in the first place. We don't want to cheat. All right, let's go back. So now that one gets a black focus ring. This one still has a primary focus ring. I can change this to focus. Remember, we're doing all of this on the fly. Let's do accent, our accent color. I don't even know what our accent color is on this install, but we're about to find out. So now we focus. There's a primary focus, a black focus, and an accent focus. Very, very critical to be able to change focus on the fly. This is stuff that other frameworks honestly don't even think about. Most of them don't even care about accessibility. Automatic CSS not only cares about accessibility, but gives you tremendous control over how accessibility behaves across your website. Okay, the next thing that we're going to take a look at is scroll offset for smooth scrolling. One of the things we introduced was CSS smooth scrolling. We introduced this specifically as an accessibility feature because jQuery smooth scrolling is not accessible. So if you're using Oxygen, for example, which uses jQuery smooth scrolling, you're going to want to turn off jQuery smooth scrolling in Oxygen and flip on CSS smooth scrolling in Automatic CSS. And that's going to make your anchor link scrolling, as an example, accessible. Now, when you have CSS smooth scrolling on, you're going to want a scroll offset. Scroll offset is not a native feature of CSS smooth scrolling, by the way. This requires a little bit of advanced customization for the CSS, but we have provided this for you in Automatic CSS. We've also provided a header height, and I want to show you how these things work. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate these sections a lot. So I'm just going to duplicate a lot, get it way down the page. I'm going to come down here to this section. And actually it should not be one that's all the way at the bottom. So we're going to do this one, and let's see if, I actually haven't looked yet at, oh, there we go. We can rename the ID just like that. So we'll call this scroll. So the ID of that section will be scroll. And on this button right here, we are going to make sure that we scroll to that section when it is clicked. Now let's take a look at if that's working. It is. It scrolls us to the section, okay? Now, I want to, which one is my scroll section here? There it is, right there. I want that BG to be white, okay? So you can clearly see, let's go back, scroll. Look, we're scrolling exactly to the top of that section, but sometimes you want an offset, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna set an offset now, and my scroll offset is gonna be 100 pixels. So now it's gonna stop 100 pixels before I get to that section. So I'll refresh, scroll, and now you see 100 pixels of gap before I get to my target. Now, that's not all. This header height, for some of you who are using sticky headers, let's say our header height is 75 pixels or 80 pixels, I can put in my header height there, and it's going to add that to my scroll offset. So now it's going to stop 180 pixels before my target. So I have even more space now. In fact, I can see that button right there. If I take off my scroll offset, yes, I'm sure, save changes, let's refresh. Let's scroll. Notice there's still an 80 pixel gap. Why is there an 80 pixel gap? Because I still have my header height set. And even though my scroll offset is 0, it always knows to protect the header. We want to make sure that we clear the header on our scroll offsets. So if you have both set, they add together. If you only have one set, it only takes the one value, and it works flawlessly every single time. Next thing is very important. Overlapping grids. This was a very big update to ACSS 2.0. You now have the ability to let me get out of this one right here. We'll go to the back end, and I believe we have a module section here, and I've got this all set up for grid overlap. All right, this is a blank page. We're going to whip this up from scratch just to show you how easy it is to create dynamic overlapping grids with Automatic CSS utility classes. So I'm going to go ahead and add a section. And in bricks, you get the outer wrapper, the inner wrapper. In the inner wrapper, I'm also going to add a div for my grid. Here's my div right here. I'm going to make a 5-column grid. So we're going to do grid _5. Now I'm going to add 2 divs to that grid. There's one, and I'm going to hit Shift Command D to duplicate. I now have 2 divs. I'm going to add an image to this grid. Okay, so we're going to add an image here. And I'm going to select my image. Now you might be wondering, why are you doing such small, why is it a 5-column grid if you only want 2 things in it? You're going to see in just a second. So I'm going to select the image here. We are going to insert. I'm going to make sure that that image is 100% wide. So I'm just going to do 100% there. And over here, we are going to leave this one alone for now. We are going to put a background on it though. We'll do base ultra light for our background. I'll stick a heading in there. I'll stick a text in there. And I'll stick a button in there as well. So we've got heading, text, and button. And now this is looking very cramped, right? But we're about to do the magic of CSS Grid and the magic of overlapping grids in Automatic CSS. So you can basically see my 2 div containers. These are my grid cells. On the first one, I'm going to say that it spans, and we're going to have a basically using starts and ends for our columns. But the first thing is when you want grids, when you want columns to overlap, you have to force them to start on the same row. And we only have 1 row, obviously, so this is going to be row 1. So on this cell, I'm going to say row start 1. Not row start 12, row start 1 right here. So row start 1. And then on my other div, I'm also going to say row start 1. And I keep hitting the 2 button for 12. But now they are both assigned to start on row 1, which means as I span them now, they will overlap. So the first thing is I want to decide for this image, how many columns do I want it to span? I made a 5-column grid, so I can span it 3 columns. I can span it 4 columns, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to call end. And if you want it to end, if you want it to span 4 columns, it would end on 5 because it ends where 5 starts, right? So call end 5, just like that. Now, where does it start? Well, it needs to start in column 1. So call start 1. because I want my image to be on the far left, right? So call start 1. So now my image is taking up 4 columns. It's starting on column 1. It's ending on the start of column 5. That's 4 columns, right? Now I'm going to take this div over here and I'm going to say, where does this need to start? So we're going to do call start. This one ends on 5. Maybe I want this one to start on 3. So I'm going to do call start 3. And then I'm going to say call end. And I can simply say last. Just take it to the very end of the container. And now, as you can obviously see that I have overlapping elements now, I'm going to do a pad L on here to give us some padding. And then I'm going to do some owl spacing to just space this out evenly. And you can see now that I have 2 overlapping elements very, very clean. I can also use align items to the center to align that div to the center if I wanted. Of course, I could put it at the bottom. I can use some margin and some additional padding if I wanted to. There's a lot of ways that I can work to change this grid. Now, what if my overlap is a little too much? Like I want the text to not overlap quite that much. Well, I can simply change its call start. So right now it's call start 3. I can remove that and say call start 4. Pop that in, and now it's a smaller overlap. What if I didn't want this image to go that far? Well, I can grab this one, and I can see right now it's ending on 5. Maybe I should just do call end of 4, and now it goes that way. Now they're touching, they're not overlapping anymore because they're assigned to start and end in the same place. So this one now, I can see that it is call starting on 4. I probably need to call start that on 3. So I can do call start 3. And you can really dial in the exact kind of overlap that you're looking for. Now, what about responsiveness, right? We want this maybe at the L breakpoint to just stack like a normal grid. So what I can do is take my grid container and I can do grid L1. So I can change this grid to 1 column at the L breakpoint. Grid L1. So now if I come down to L, you can see that now they're trying to stack again, but they still have their other instructions on them, which is no problem, right? So for example, this one, I was assigning it to start on row 1. I actually want this to start on row 2 now. So I'm going to say row start L2. Row start L2 is going to force this to start in the 2nd row at the L breakpoint. Now you're still seeing a little bit of a offset here, and that's because of this. Remember, we were telling it to start at column 3, but there really isn't a column 3 anymore. So it's trying to generate basically blank columns. So now at the L breakpoint, just to fix that, we do call start L1. So just saying, hey, now on the L breakpoint, just start back at column 1, and it's going to fix that little tiny little offset that we were seeing there. And now I'm going to go preview this on the front. So at a desktop, we have this nice dynamic overlapping grid. And as we come down, we're going to see that it stacks. And now we have just a normal responsive, what looks to be a card, right? So very, very quickly, I whip that up. Overlapping grids, possible now in ACSS 2.0. And this stuff is going to get even better when we have the 12-column grid structure available to you in a future update. The overlap, the ability to control the overlap is now going to double in granularity. So very, very powerful stuff with the overlapping grids. Last but not least, you've already been seeing it as I show you all this stuff live. ACSS 2.0 now fully supports Bricks Builder. So if you've been eyeing Bricks and you're wanting to give it a shot, or you're already developing websites in Bricks, Automatic.css 2.0, the full power of ACSS 2.0 is available to you in Bricks. And I want you to check out a couple things here. So I'm going to go over to, actually, we can just stay in the builder. So here we are in the builder. I'm going to go into settings. I want to show you one of the really cool features that we've done with Bricks that we were not able to do in Oxygen, but the way Bricks is designed does make this possible. So when you're setting up your colors in Bricks, in fact, you don't have to set up your colors at all in Bricks. You set them up in ACSS, and ACSS auto loads every color, every shade, every transparency directly into Bricks Builder. So I'm going to grab this right here, and let's say that I wasn't using the BG base ultralight class, but I wanted to put the ultralight color. Maybe I'm creating a custom class, right? So we'll just say custom class, just something like that. And I want to assign that background color to that custom class. I'm going to go into background, and I'm going to touch this little background color icon. And I want you to see something here. Very, very cool. All of the palettes are organized in Bricks Builder automatically for you. The second you install ACSS 2.0, all of your colors are going to be in here. So if I go to my primary palette, you're going to see there's my primary ultralight, I meant to click on global. If I go to my global palette, you're going to see I have my primary, my secondary, my accent, my base, and my shade. But then if I want to see all of my primary colors, there they are right there for you. The ultralight, light, medium, dark, ultra dark, primary hover, primary comp, right? Then you have your trans 40, 80, 90, that's all of your transparencies. The light versions of your transparencies, the dark versions of your transparencies, all within the primary color family, all automatically loaded for you. If I want to look at my secondary colors, there's my secondary palette. There's my accent palette. There's my base palette. All of these are programmed in for you. You can even add your own to this now. You can add your own variables. Very, very powerful stuff. So I wanted to assign the base ultralight to this. So there's base ultralight. I'm going to click it and it is going to add it. Now, you don't need to edit colors here, right? Remember, these are all effectively placeholders because they all just call the variable. That's very smart of Bricks to do that like that. So that if I ever change my base in ACSS, like in the dashboard here, so I go to colors, change my base to, let's do something like, I don't know, this horribly ugly color. We're going to load this on the front end. And you can see right there, I was not using an ACSS class here. I was not using a variable. I actually chose the color from the Bricks palette. And when I changed it in ACSS, it changed here because it knows that it's pulling that from an ACSS variable. This is very, very powerful stuff. It's what people were begging us for in Oxygen for months and months and months. And just because of the Oxygen's limitations of how their colors are managed, it wasn't possible. But in Bricks, it's more than possible. Like this is fantastic, and this is going to dramatically speed up your workflow. Again, this is something that people asked for months and months and months. It is now available in Bricks. All right, let's get back to camera. That is it for the ACSS 2.0 update overview. I first of all want to say thank you to all of you who use and support Automatic CSS. If you don't currently use Automatic CSS, I want to invite you to giving it a shot. You can go to automatic.css.com, grab yourself a license, and obviously very affordable. The amount of time that you are going to save, the amount of consistency that you are going to achieve, and this is just scratching the surface. I'm just showing you what's new, right? All of the other stuff that's so helpful that everybody loves about Automatic CSS still available to you in 2.0. It's only going to get better. That's all I have to say. It's only going to get better. So if you feel like there's a major gap between Automatic CSS and other frameworks, I can promise you this, that gap is only going to widen. Again, thank you for using ACSS. Thank you for your support. That is it. I am out. Peace.